Hi, I'm Abby and this is Lucy, and we're from Infectious PR presenting a talk on an introduction to PR. Pitching to press, one of the main things I'd say for PR is your relationships that you have with journalists. Being based in Bristol, obviously a lot of the journalists that we speak to are in London, so as a company we make like a really big effort to make sure we're going to journalists and getting our face-to-face meetings in, because I think that's the biggest way to sort of build a rapport with these people. One of the best pieces of advice I'd probably say is if a journalist is like really early in their career, and as are you, that's a really nice way to link with someone. So someone that I speak to all the time is one of the first ever journalists I spoke to in my job, and likewise for her. So whenever I email her, she will always reply because we have like a friendship now.
You've like grown together in your respective worlds.
Yeah, and like everyone loves a back scratch. So, you know, if you can see like a journalist has just joined a new publication, if you like just message them, oh, congratulations, like let's go out for a drink to celebrate. It's just like a really nice way to sort of build that. But the main way to pitch to press is emailing. The amount of emails that these journalists get is absolutely insane. I'm like really OCD with my inbox, so I dread to think what theirs are like. I
don't know how they do it.
Yeah, but yeah, it's mad. Like I've seen people go on holiday for like a day and they'll have like 1,000 emails in their inbox. So the most important thing I'd say is your subject line. How are you going to grab that journalist and make sure that they read your email? Quite a lot of the time with like emerging artists, we might do something we call for fans of. So I don't know if we were working, I can't think of anyone else who had like a craze or something, who hadn't necessarily had success. You might reference a few people in the subject line, like DJ Snake, for example, or those sort of artists, so that, you know, if that journalist has covered DJ Snake in the past, they might open it because they might think, oh, okay, maybe I will like this track. And also another really key thing I'd say for the subject line is put in your release date, because if a journalist can see that they've got their lead time, they're obviously going to be more inclined to cover it. But that being said, if you haven't got the lead time, maybe don't put it in. But they do really appreciate it, because as soon as they can see that, they can just, they just press delete or not. The next thing I'd probably say is your private listening link. So obviously all these contacts are getting the records before they come out. So I'd make sure that you upload it somewhere. We often use SoundCloud, depending on who we're working with, so that people can access the music and in a really easy way. There's like, even from our side, when we get sent music, there's nothing more frustrating if someone sent us a link and you can't listen to it, because, you know, if this journalist has opened your email, that's the first step, and then the listening link doesn't work, you know, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Don't use WeTransfer.
Yeah, never.
If people don't have much time and they have to go through the process of downloading and unzipping a file, you're just using up valuable time when they could be spending listening to your actual music and going on your socials. Yeah. So streamable links are very much favourable for all parties, I would say.
And then obviously you want to put details of the release and the and the artist. You want to keep this really concise, because obviously, as I just mentioned, these journalists are getting a lot of emails, but obviously the most important things are the date, the label, and then maybe you've picked your artist for different story angles, so you could pop a couple of ideas for the journalist, unless you want just sort of a news post, and you could just give a summary of the sort of things that they're up to. I sort of have touched on journalist interest already, but, you know, if you ever are to go in PR, I'd recommend following all the journalists that you ever want to speak to on Instagram, because you could be like, oh, I hope you had fun at this gig last week. I think you might like this tune. And it gives that more personal touch. You need to sort of personalise it so that that journalist knows that you're specifically talking to them. And that's definitely easier with people that you know and you understand. What sort of coverage are you looking for? So this could be something like, is that artist going to be doing a mix feature with that particular publication? And does that publication even do mixes? So just really considering what the outcome of what you emailing them is going to be. So it could be a news post, it could be a mix piece, it could be an interview, it could be a social takeover. But yeah, really consider how you want that piece of coverage to look, but in a way that isn't too pushy, because obviously at the end of the day, the journalists are the creatives. You're just there to sort of plant the seed. When does it need to go live? So this is probably more of a client expectation. Ideally, you don't want a news post about a track coming out before the artist has even released it. You know, the label might be quite precious in terms of really announcing that someone's having an album coming out. So making sure that like those sort of things are really bolded in your emails and stuff, like, so you, if anything does go wrong, God forbid, you've got evidence to be like, look, no, I did say, could you do it here? And then usually they rectify it. And then finally, what assets does that journalist need to have? So that would be things like your press shots, your bio, which would be a little bit different to a press release. A press release is more of a story around a particular album or track, which has like more anecdotal things in, whereas a bio might be a bit more of a like lowdown of a history of an artist. Yeah, and a selection of press shots. I'm trying to think anything else. And also artwork is quite good. So sometimes publications might not necessarily run a piece with that particular artist's face on the piece, but the artwork in high res might be like in a sort of New Music Friday roundup, and it will just be all the different artworks. But yeah, everything needs to be high res and preferably like JPEG rather than TIFF or something, because they're just enormous files and journalists obviously don't need that.
In their inbox.
In their inbox, but we often upload stuff to a Google Drive as well, which means that these journalists aren't getting massive attachments, because that also could, sometimes their servers won't even allow that through. So if we've got it on a Google Drive link, it means that they can easily access stuff.